Hey everybody, this is Matthew Soltesiak and you're listening to Not the Same Old Lions podcast. Using my sportscasting background, I speak with a variety of guests and interview key players to gain more insight on what makes this team go. As the Detroit Lions enter a new gritty era, we'll look beyond just the kneecaps when it comes to the analysis. Welcome to another episode. Today we're going to discuss the upcoming free agency, some players and positions the Lions might be targeting, and how this could affect the NFL draft, specifically the Lions and people drafting around them. I'm joined today by James Cook, senior sports writer for the Traverse City Record-Eagle. You can also hear him on the Get Around podcast. It drops on Mondays. Good to have you here, James.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, James, the Combine just wrapped up. It's got everybody talking about the draft a lot. And that makes sense because you've got all these college athletes getting ready and they're measuring everything. But let's be honest, the free agency period is going to have a heavy impact on the draft. In some ways, it doesn't even make sense to do mock drafts until free agency gets started.
Yeah, to an extent. I mean, the Lions, I think, are a team that's going to build a lot through the draft, but they also want to try to retain a decent number of these guys that are free agents. And whether they can or not will, I think, change things as to how the draft goes. I think up top in the draft, maybe not. Like who they pick in the first round, those 2 first-round picks, I don't know that really is going to matter whether they re-sign Jamal Williams or not. But a lot of these other positions, I think it will. You know, when you get farther down in the draft, if they've re-signed John Kaminsky, they're much more likely, less likely, I think, to draft another edge rusher.
That's interesting. And, there's some players that are going to get franchise tagged around the league, and that will affect some players that are available for free agency and then, again, impact the draft. So, you brought up Jamal Williams. Why don't we start talking about the Lions' running game? We talked about them possibly drafting a running back. We've already been hearing this. And so what happens with Jamal Williams could actually impact that significantly with what they do, whether they re-sign Jamal Williams or they sign a different free agent. Now, as of the latest thing we've heard, Jamal Williams, Brad Holmes, we've heard there's mutual interest between both parties for him to come back. We've talked about how the running back market is pretty saturated. What are your thoughts going in?
I guess I just kind of assume that he's going to re-sign with Detroit, just because it seems like he wants to be back so much. Like you said, there's so many good running backs in free agency this year, and the Lions have another one in free agency in Justin Jackson too, who they may even bring back. I don't know. Depends on if they do draft another running back. Even if Jamal Williams comes back, I think they still are fairly likely to draft a running back in the middle rounds or somewhere in the draft. I don't know that they're gonna put their toes in the water in the first round and draft Bijan Robinson at 18 if he's there. But I think that they're not thinking that DeAndre Swift is a long-term solution given his injury history, and when he's been on the field, he's been pretty good, but mostly just a receiving back, essentially.
He's done better at the receiving than the running, and he was banged up so much last year that there's not a lot that we actually got to see.
Yeah, they didn't. It's not like they were gonna, because he was so hurt. It's not like they were gonna say, "Hey, we're gonna give you 20 carries between the tackles today," Right. So, and they got Jamal Williams doing that, and he did a good job of just every time getting the ball. 3.5, 4 yards.
It sounds like the Lions are probably going to re-sign Jamal Williams. Like I said, there's some mutual interest between the two. Mm-hmm. So I'm optimistic that that's going to happen. And if that does happen, I do think that significantly impacts their draft as well. Because I don't think they draft a guy like Bijan Robinson at 18 if they re-sign Jamal Williams. And some would wonder whether that's even a good draft spot for a running back regardless of this.
I could see it. Running the running back position as far as draft capital has kind of become one of the positions where everybody's like, you don't draft one in the first round, and especially not high. I mean, There hasn't been a high draft pick. I mean, the other ones in like the last decade or so have been Ezekiel Elliott and Saquon Barkley, where the Lions pick at 18. Then running back maybe starts making a little bit more sense, especially if they think that that's one of the last things they need. And we know how Dan Campbell likes to run the ball. He's going to run the ball whether they have good running backs or not. And so he'd much rather they have good running backs to do it. So I wouldn't be shocked if they did that. If he was there at 18, I think they're certainly going to consider it. I don't think they think that Swift is going to be on the team after next season. Justin Jackson's a free agent too.
Right.
Craig Reynolds he's like a number 3 or 4 guy. That's it. He's not a guy that's going to carry the ball a whole lot of times. He's special teams, and if you need him to carry the ball a few times, if somebody gets dinged up or whatever, he can.
He's a fill-in guy.
Yeah.
As a Lions fan, I'm hopeful they re-sign Jamal Williams for what he did on the field, but more so even what he did in the locker room. He brings stability to that position. The Lions said they're going to re-look at DeAndre Swift and see what they can do to start over and see if they can't help keep him healthy and whatnot. I do want them to draft somebody. The more we look at this, the more we think about it, the less I want them to use a first-round pick on it. And that's going to be a lot to talk about once we get down and see what their other needs are. But re-signing Jamal Williams, I think that's a priority for the team. I think that's one they hopefully do, especially running with that offense. But let's move over to the offensive line, because if you're going to be successful as a running back, you need to have guys to block and open up lanes for you. So the Lions have Evan Brown, who played right guard most of the year for them, who's a free agent. And then Haloti Vaitai is coming back from an injury, so we don't even know what he's going to look like yet. What do you think the offensive line's looking like?
I expect them to lose Evan Brown in free agency. Somebody's going to come around and offer him a Graham Glasgow type contract that the Lions are just not going to want to match.
Wasn't it the Broncos that did that?
Yes. Ironically, the Broncos also just released Graham Glasgow in a salary cap cut. So maybe he could even come back. I mean, he is a Michigan guy.
He is, yeah.
I could also see them restructuring Vaitai to bring him back at a lower cost. He's one of the more expensive guys on there. I think he's the 4th most expensive guy. The 4th biggest contract on the Lions.
And he didn't play at all last year.
Yeah, he didn't play anything outside of spring, outside of a training camp. And I mean, he costs them like, I think, $9 million, which is a lot for a guard. So, I think Evan Brown will get more than that, though.
So if Evan Brown's gone, and we don't know about Vaitai, is there a chance that the Lions make a move at offensive line in free agency? Or do you think that's something they might wait for in the draft?
I think that you'll probably see them later in free agency, maybe try to sign 1 or 2 veterans for competition in there. I would expect more likely that spot to be filled with a draft pick or re-signing Vaitai, or just bringing him back and just being like, we're under the cap enough. I don't think the Lions are going to splurge in free agency. I think they're gonna continue to do what they've done the last 2 years under Brad Holmes, which is bargain bin shop. Get the post June 1 cuts and continue to haul in compensatory picks. Let some of the free agents that are going to go for more money than you want, let somebody else take them and get the compensatory picks for it, and then sign some cheap guys which has worked out for them. Getting guys like John Kaminsky, Charles Harris, Alex Anzalone. They've had a decent number of players that they've signed pretty inexpensively.
They have.
That have been players who've played a lot, and a lot of them played pretty well. Isaiah Buggs, another one.
Yeah, I feel like we're hearing some conflicting things right now out of the Lions, and that's not a surprise, around the combine and getting ready to free agency, because everyone wants to kind of keep their cards close to their vest. I don't think they're going to overpay. I agree with you on that. You've heard the names like Jalen Ramsey, and Lions fans want him, and we've already talked about him on this show. That size of a contract with a high draft pick, neither of those make sense for the Lions.
I don't think so either. I don't see the Lions trading picks away for players, especially not young players.
Right.
And nobody else is going to trade their young players away for draft picks for the most part, unless they've already given up on them. So I just don't see that happening. Brad Holmes values his draft capital.
While I agree that they're not going to work to overpay somebody, a couple things. One is I don't think they have to overpay anymore. I think the culture shifted in the last 12 to 14 months, maybe even only the last 3 to 4 months, whatever it is. I think they're going to get people who are willing to come here without having to overpay them to come here because of the culture. And I believe it was Brad Holmes said there's a couple guys that the Lions might be interested in who might get the franchise tag from their teams. So that tells me they're willing to make a Brad Holmes type move if the price is right and everything lines up. Like, I thought DJ Shark was a pretty big move for the Lions last year. It was a $10 million deal, which doesn't seem big compared to what other receivers got. And I know he was coming back from injury, but that was a guy I thought we didn't have a chance at. So I think there could be 1 or 2 surprises. But I agree they're not going to go for a major home run deal that's going to be a 5 to 7 year, $100 million contract.
No. The last 2 years, their modus operandi has been sign guys at reasonable 1 to 2 year contracts.
Do you think there's going to be a slight adjustment in that, knowing that they were one game away, a half a game away from making the playoffs, and you feel like, okay, now you know that window is open. So while you still want to stay true to course, as they've talked about, maybe there's a spot or two that they say, hey, we're going to go for a couple things.
Everything I've heard so far says no, that they're going to stick the course, that Holmes has got this plan, and what they've been doing the last 2 years is the plan, and that's going to be what they're going to continue to do, which is it's almost the old Packers under Ted Thompson thing, draft well, develop your own guys, re-sign your own priority free agents, and don't really bring in a whole lot of big name free agents until Gutekunst was in there as general manager, and he brought in a couple of big name free agents for the defense. I mean, the only two really big names that they brought in was when they did the Reggie White splash and Charles Woodson. But Charles Woodson was a little bit older. So, I mean, they still had to pay him a decent amount of money, but it wasn't like an Aaron Rodgers contract.
Right.
I don't see the Lions doing anything like that. I think the guys they're going to get money from the Lions are going to be their own guys. And they don't have any guys, I think, this year that are ones that they're going to fork over $10 million a year.
So that brings up
to keep
our wide receiver, DJ Shark. He's probably the one who will command the biggest contract of any Detroit Lion. And we're not thin at wide receiver right now. You've got Jamison Williams going to be a full season here. He had a handful of games he played last year. You've got Amon-Ra St. Brown coming back, Josh Reynolds. You've got Quentin Cephas and Khalif Raymond. Cephas, I believe, is still under contract for at least another year.
I think he has another year left, yes.
So you've got that group right there. What are your thoughts on DJ Shark? Does it seem like he's going to be priced out of our team?
I think so. I mean, unless they do a lot of juggling of contracts, and redoing Vitae's could be one of those things to do that. They already, I think, restructured Taylor Decker in the offseason already to create a little bit more cap space. But I think part of that is just to give them enough room to be able to sign all their draft picks and be able to get a couple of veterans and free agents in free agency. I think that they're going to be priced out of the Shark market. There's not a lot of good free agent wide receivers this year.
No, Shark, Lazard, Odell Beckham. Those are like the bigger names. Jacoby Myers.
Yeah. So there's not a lot. So somebody's going to overpay for him. I know Spot Track has him getting like a 3 or 4 year deal with like an average of $9.5 million a year or something like that. But I think somebody's going to swoop in and offer him like $12 million a season.
Well, and let's think about this for a minute. Even if the Lions could fit him in with the cap, one, does Shark want to come back knowing the ball's going to be spread around that much? And two, would the Lions team be better off spending that $10, $11 million on a defensive back or linebacker?
I think so. I think on defense for sure. And there's a decent number of free agents this year. It's already been some cap casualties that are guys that the Lions are talking about. Bobby Wagner.
Yeah.
At least Lions fans, I think, are talking about. I don't know.
They are.
Bobby Wagner would be a great addition. I mean, he didn't drop off last year like people thought.
No,
he
not
would.
at all.
So he was still an elite linebacker in the NFL. He was just too expensive for the team he was on because the Rams are in just cap hell.
They are a mess with their salary cap for right now.
And so, I mean, they're having to get rid of Jalen Ramsey. They're probably going to start restructuring contracts with a lot of people making a bunch of cuts.
So if the Lions do move on from DJ Shark, do you see them signing another free agent wide receiver, maybe a guy like Robert Woods who has history with Goff and Brad Holmes knows him as another guy at a lower price contract? Or do you see them passing on the free agency wide receiver thing, thinking they've got some depth and maybe draft somebody in the 5th or 6th round?
I think you could see both. You could see them draft somebody in the middle of the round, even higher than 5th or 6th. I could see them drafting somebody in the 3rd round or something, if the right guy's there, and signing some kind of veteran, probably a cheap veteran. I don't know how much Bobby Trees is going to command on the in the market, but I mean, he's an older wide receiver, so it's not going to be a lot. The $3 million range. a season or so, 3, 4 maybe.
And his stats were down last year. Obviously, he was a new system. He's playing with different quarterbacks. He's not with
played
the
with
Rams.
3 different quarterbacks, none of whom looked good.
And he was still, it was his first year after his major injury. So I would actually love it if they were to get.
He would not be a bad gamble. Somebody I saw mention was Kenny Galladay, but I don't think that'll happen. He's not the kind of receiver Goff likes. Goff doesn't like throwing 50-50 balls up and letting the receiver go get it. He wants to hit you when you're 5 yards out in front of somebody.
I don't know if he would be the best fit for what we're building right now. He was there before. We appreciated him at the time, but it seemed like when he left, he was moving on, and it seems like we moved on, and I just don't see a reconciliation. I almost think Kenny Galladay might be better fit going to join Matthew Stafford with the Rams.
Yeah, I could totally see that. I mean, I don't blame him for taking that contract because the Giants way overpaid him.
I would take that contract too. Yeah.
And I know, when I saw how much money that was, I was like, I wouldn't. If I was the Lions, I wouldn't pay that either. No. And then he did next to nothing for the Giants. It's like once he got paid big money, he just acted hurt all the time.
He got us our third round compensatory pick.
Yeah, and the Lions got a 3rd round pick out of that, which was, I believe, Kirby.
It was, yes, Kirby Joseph.
I think. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I think it was Kirby Joseph.
I'm pretty sure it was as well. All right, so we looked at the wide receiver part where we could draft or not. We could sign a veteran at a lower price if Shark is gone, which we both believe that's going to happen. But then keeping with the passing thing, a lot of people are talking tight end right now because we traded T.J. Hockenson mid-season. If T.J. Hockenson and DJ Shark are no longer on your offense, we know one thing. The offense might not need to get better, but we don't want it to get worse. We don't want it to regress. Right now, we've got Mitchell under contract still because he was a rookie last year. And you've got Brock Wright and Shane Zylstra, which I believe both are exclusive rights free agents, which means we can get them back, and I expect us to have them back.
At pretty reasonable costs. So, yeah, I think those 3, I would not be shocked at all if the tight end position is those 3 again next season.
I could not agree with you more. I think that's probably the direction they're going to go. And I think it's a smart direction because I think they meet the needs of the team.
Yeah, I think so too. And, I think the tight end position for the Lions played better after Hockenson left. And I like Hockenson as a player, but it was almost like Ben Johnson was like, we're going to throw the tight ends a lot more now just to show Hockenson after he kind of opened his mouth and put his foot in there after he signed with the Vikings. But those three players were very productive. If you put those 3 together, they were a great fantasy tight end.
Yes, they
down
were.
Down the season. But I wouldn't be shocked if the Lions drafted another tight end this year in those middle to later rounds because it is a fairly deep tight end class this year. There's a lot of good tight ends in the back end of the draft.
Okay.
And they could get another guy like a Mitchell.
Yeah, and Mitchell, we still don't know his ceiling yet.
Yeah. And Mitchell, was somebody who they drafted who was hurt when they drafted him, and they knew wouldn't probably be ready at the beginning of the season, and he wasn't. So I think that what you saw from him last season is nowhere near as good as he's supposed to be.
I agree. I don't see the Lions putting more money into the tight end position. Some people have said, hey, we should trade for this guy. We should go get this free agent. I don't see them putting a lot of money into that. I think they like where they're at with that. The important thing is they don't want to get worse, which means Jamison Williams is going to have to prove to be the type of wide receiver Lions fans and the team is hoping he's going to be. It means we may have to get another free agent wide receiver in there or draft somebody, but probably a free agent veteran like we talked about at a lower price.
I expect Jamison Williams to play so much better next season. I think his ceiling is Randy Moss light.
So those are some high ceilings right there.
Yeah.
Got a little cathedral ceiling going on.
I don't know if he's going to be the same receiver that Moss was as far as going up and getting 50-50 balls and everything, but I think he can be the same home run hitter that Randy Moss was, where you just throw the ball deep to him, let him go get it.
I think we all know that we've got the guy throwing the ball right now, and that's Jared Goff. But the big question is going to be, it has to be, who's going to be behind Jared Goff? Because recently Brad Holmes even admitted they kind of botched that last year. And I saw that from 1,000 miles away, was like, okay, this is what we're going into the season with. So we didn't have a lot of back there.
Yeah, they got to bring somebody in, I think, and or draft. I could see both. I could see a reasonably cheap veteran, somebody with some experience playing in the NFL, starting in the NFL, who's maybe a couple years past his prime or doesn't have a starting gig anymore. We mentioned a bunch of guys last time. You know,
we did. And it's not going to take much to upgrade our backup quarterback position, but I agree with you. The backup position needs to be someone with NFL experience that if our guy gets hurt, if Jared Goff gets hurt, they can come in and you feel like there's at least a chance to win a game. And so, as we mentioned Sam Darnold, Cooper Rush. There's about Andy Dalton. There's about a half a dozen guys that you're like, hey, they're serviceable. They'd be inexpensive, and they would bring stability to that position.
Yeah. It's expensive for a quarterback. Like a backup quarterback starts to cost you about as much as a starting linebacker.
It's going to cost you some money, yes.
Yeah, but I can totally see that. I can see them double dipping at that position too and drafting somebody later in the draft.
Somewhere after round 2 or 3, a later one to have, and they should carry 3 quarterbacks on the roster. I think there's a good chance of that because they're looking at changing that emergency quarterback rule so that teams can have 3 quarterbacks. That way, we saw it happen in the NFC Championship game. So that could help. You want the guy that can step in, but you also want the developmental position. So I'm optimistic and hopeful that both of those things happen.
I think you'll see more teams doing that. A lot of teams were trying to save that extra roster spot and go with 2 quarterbacks, and man, it was risky.
So it'll be interesting to see what the Lions do with quarterback. We both fully expect them to bring in a veteran and then draft somebody and actually feel good going into the season at that position. Because we were lucky. Jared Goff did not get hurt last year. The year before he did. Hopefully he stays healthy again. But you want to know that, hey, if you think you're a legit playoff team, if your starter goes down, you want to know someone can fill in. I mean, Philadelphia had a fill-in quarterback. The 49ers had 2 fill-in quarterbacks. You never know how they're going to perform, but you at least want to know you have a chance.
Yeah, I think Minshew's another of those guys that's a free agent this year.
He is. He's got a fun attitude. He's got a fun style of play.
I think he would fit into that locker room a bit. Imagine him and Jamal Williams on the same team.
I would love to see an interview with them on each side of the reporter.
Or just them asking each other questions.
That might even be better, yeah. Just having them interviewing each other. Just give those 2 their own
podcast.
Well, let's move over to the defense because that's the area that doesn't need to just stay the way it is. We need to see improvement. Obviously, they often say players improve most from their first year to second year. So we have a lot of players where we're expecting to see improve who were rookies last year. But we've also got some players that are becoming free agents that we might need to re-sign. I think the biggest one we've talked about is maybe re-signing Kaminsky.
I think he's priority number 1 on defense. He might even be priority number 1 over Jamal Williams overall. He was a fairly high draft pick, like a 3rd-round pick, I think, and they just, after a year or 2, gave up on him, and the Lions gave him a second chance, and it worked out. I mean,
it worked out great. He was such a difference maker. There was games where he was out, and you saw what happened to our run defense while he was gone.
Oh, yeah, that Carolina game. I mean, just look at the difference that Carolina game.
Was he out that game?
I think he was out that game, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That would make a lot of sense then.
Yeah. Yeah, and then he played with the club after that.
He did, and he was still effective.
Yeah. He's that edge-setting defensive end, but he can also get in the backfield and cause some havoc there. So he's not just a one-trick pony at defensive end. He can stop the run, he can set the edge, and he can get in the backfield.
Yeah, I would love it. I think most fans and probably the team believes he's probably their number 1. And I agree with you. That's their top priority should be to bring him back because he really helps improve that defense. If the Lions were to look to make a big splash in free agency, there are some big tackles out there. Javon Hargrave from Philly is probably the biggest name out there. Deron Payne, I believe, just got franchised, so he's not going to be an option. You're going to have to pay a lot for one of these guys. If you're not paying for one of these guys, you're hoping to draft one. We recently saw that the top guy the Lions are interested in, Jalen Carter, now has a lot of questions surrounding him. There's a lot of time between now and the draft. You also want to be careful that you're drafting 6, so you don't know who you're going to have a shot at unless you plan to move up. So you don't want to just wait for the draft if you have a chance to fill a spot.
Yeah. I think the weird, cynical way to look at the Jalen Carter thing is that it makes it more likely he falls to 6 because most mock drafts I saw had him going in the top 5. Like if the Lions really, really wanted him, if he was the guy they thought was the final piece of that defensive line, which he very well could be, that they were going to have to move up from 6 to get him. Now I think it's more likely that he's still sitting there at 6.
Well, there's still a lot of time between now and the draft
That's
to see
true.
What happens. And from what I've heard, the Bears seem to love him. And if they trade back, they're going to probably stay in front of the Lions so that they have a shot at him.
Yeah, they could trade back to a spot where they could still get Will Anderson, though.
Will Anderson's also a great option.
Will Anderson's number 1, I think, and Jalen Carter's number 2 on the defensive players in the draft. And then if nobody's there, I think the Lions go corner at 6.
And there's some great defensive backs.
Yeah. There's two great defensive backs that they can get and plug and play at 6.
So along the defensive line, the big name was John Kaminsky, but Isaiah Buggs is another guy we would like to have back. He added some talent increase on there compared to what we had going into the season or right before we got him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's a guy who I think there was a lot of excitement when they brought him in because he's an Alabama guy. He was like one of the top recruits in the country coming out of high school, all that kind of stuff. And in the NFL, he just hadn't really done anything. The Lions gave him a chance, and he showed he could be a rotational guy, but I think that's what they view him as, is just a rotational guy. He's like not the guy at defensive tackle. Aleem McNeil is one of the guys at defensive tackle, and Buggs is a good player to have behind him.
Well, that's the thing.
He's a rotational defensive tackle on a good defense.
And it seems we had a lot of rotating going on because we've had guys injured. We're going to see who's coming back from injury, who's going to play a key role this year because, as Brad Holmes said, you can't look at just the whole season in one snapshot, right? You had early in the season, middle of the season, and late season. And in the late season, guys were getting healthier, but also the younger players were getting more experience, so you saw growth. So he doesn't think our defense is necessarily as bad as our overall rankings for the season.
Yeah, you saw the defense get better. I don't know what the issue was with Aubrey Pleasant and why he was let go, but the defense certainly seemed to get a lot better after that move was made. I don't know if it was necessarily because of that or if it was that shakeup that maybe made Aaron Glenn kind of say, oh, well, I think I got to change some things here too. Or maybe I'm next. Because that whole it's his defense.
It was. And they made a big change. Whatever the little tweaks that they did or the big adjustments, they made a big difference. Do you think that defensive line, again, we talked about Kaminsky, we talked about Buggs, do the Lions need to go get a free agent out there on the defensive line, or should we maybe save that for like the linebacking and secondary core?
I'm going to guess that they're going to draft. I think they're going to use those 2 number 1 picks on defense. So I think that they can get a corner and a defensive tackle at those spots, one way or the other. If Carter slips to him at 6, then maybe you take Carter there, and maybe you hope one of those corners slips to 18.
There's a number of corners.
Yeah, or you take a corner at 6. You take the kid from Oregon.
You like Gonzalez over Witherspoon?
Or Witherspoon. I think they're 1A and 1B.
Okay.
So and I think both of them are guys that you could take at 6, and I would not be unhappy.
Now, let me ask you, are you concerned? Because, people are a little bit nervous because we drafted a corner in the top 5, and it's still a work in progress. Now, should you let something like that influence your decision going forward, or do you treat it as a unique individual with a unique situation?
Yeah, I don't think that whiffing on a draft pick should make you gun shy of drafting that position again. Everybody's always like, "Oh, don't draft the tight end," and because you've failed at drafting tight ends in the past. But it's like, what are you just going to punt on that position?
Especially if you have a player there that you really think is great, just because they're in that position and it didn't work before, seems foolish to pass.
Yeah, I could see that happening where another guy that they could get at 18 is Kalijah Cansey, that defensive tackle. If they could get him at 18 and get one of the elite corners at 6, that would be a coup for this defense. It would fill 2 spots immediately, and if you get Carter at 6 and one of the corners slips to 18, I don't think that it'll be Witherspoon or Gonzalez slipping to 18 for sure. But there's some other corners that could be there at 18. There's a couple safeties at the tail end of this first round that could be guys that they could slip right in for replacing Deshaun Elliott, who's probably another guy we're going to talk about.
Yeah. Well, before we get to the defensive secondary, let's move back just to the linebacking core, because that's one where we definitely need some help.
Yeah, and the defense that they played last year, I don't know if that's the defense that Aaron Glenn wants to play.
We talked about the nickel, right?
Yeah, how pretty much playing the nickel with 2 linebackers almost all the time. I don't know if that's what he wants to play or if what he had to play.
Meaning they didn't have a good third linebacker to roll out there regularly.
Yeah, it sort of depends on that. But I would like to see more better linebackers in that linebacker core.
Are you hoping that they bring Anzalone back?
Yeah, I think Anzalone's a good player to have on the defense. He's flexible. He can cover. Is he a Pro Bowl level linebacker? No. But he can be a good, I don't know if I want to say role player, maybe better than a role player, but not necessarily a starter on a really good defense. If your defense is really good, is Alex Anzalone going to be one of your stars at linebacker? Probably not. He's just going to be a guy.
But he's going to be a guy that can get the job done.
He's going to be a guy who can get the job done, who you can count on. You can put him in positions, and he's not gonna mess up. He can drop into coverage pretty well for a linebacker, which fits into that nickel defense that they played so much last year. You know, they've got Chris Board's a free agent too at linebacker, and Josh Woods, he played a little bit here and there, but mostly a special teams player. Same thing with Board. I think they're going to look and see if they can upgrade from those guys.
I think that there's a bigger need to upgrade at linebacker than defensive line right now from the free agency area, because we still have optimism and hope, because we have a lot of guys on that D line that we still think could develop into something.
Yeah, you never know. Anzuwarake could suddenly be a good defensive tackle next year if his back problems are gone and he's what he was supposed to be when he was drafted in the second round.
We got Josh Pascal.
They got Pascal, and he was very good in the last few games when he was healthy. So he's another one, and he's a guy who can play in or out. He could play be a big defensive end or a kind of undersized defensive tackle for you. So he's another piece. I think they do need they need another defensive tackle, a top end defensive tackle, and they either got to have a massive run stopping defensive tackle or somebody who's going to push the pocket on a regular basis and be able to get some pressure.
That'd be a difference maker, because we've been improving greatly at the edge.
Yeah.
But if you can disrupt the middle of that pocket, the quarterback can't step up.
Yeah, I mean, and Liam McNeil can do a bit of both of those things. I'm hoping he takes another step this year, because he could be that guy. But they need to have another defensive tackle who comes in and is either an elite run stuffing defensive tackle or somebody who will just push the pocket. I think Cansey can be that guy as the pushing the pocket, so can Carter. And there's several guys available later in the draft who are, 340-pound behemoths that you can stick in the middle, kind of like Bugs, but maybe better.
That makes sense. That would be good to just add a little bit to that. As far as linebacking goes, I want to go back to Bobby Wagner, because you mentioned him earlier. And I heard a weird rumor that there was a rumor out there that the Lions were maybe interested in Bobby Wagner a year ago when he got let go with Seattle. Mm-hmm. And if there is even a sliver of a truth to that, if that is true, you've got to think a couple things. One, the Lions look much more appealing to Bobby Wagner than a year ago. And two, even though he played as well as he did, he won't cost as much as a year ago. Even though he's still going to cost.
Probably not, because he's, getting close to that magic number of 30 years old. He's not there yet, but he's getting closer. So yeah, that's going to bring the cost down in the NFL world. But last year he still played at an elite level, and I would hope that that's more than rumor. I would hope that if you're an NFL general manager, you're doing your job, and there's at least some interest. And if a guy like Wagner comes on the free agent market, that you're at least saying, "Hey, we're interested. Can you take a look at us?" or something.
Right, because he would be an instant upgrade. Like you said, he might not be a long-term guy there. He might not be a 5 to 6 year guy, but he would instantly help solidify that linebacking core.
Yeah, and I could see them offering him a decent-sized two-year contract. Maybe that's what they were restructuring Taylor Decker for or something. But I could see them offering him something like that, because he was let go by the Rams, so he doesn't count against the compensatory equation.
That's nice.
And I think that plays a role in free agency in Brad Holmes' mind.
I have a feeling this year is going to be a little bit of an anomaly, or a little different than we've seen in past years with the Lions and that compensatory thing, because the only player that I think is really going to leave the Lions that could count towards compensatory would be DJ Shark. And if you sign somebody else, even mid-level, whether it's a defensive back or anybody, it could wipe it out pretty quickly.
Yeah, that's why I don't think you're going to see them signing anybody to a big level contract in the first few days of free agency. But I think between losing Chark, Brown, and probably Deshaun Elliott at safety, you're looking at probably over $30 million in yearly values of those contracts. That's a compensatory pick or two. If you don't sign other guys to take that number down, that's going to add up, I think, And then I don't know if they re-sign Will Harris or not. He's a guy that they have to look at. I think that they'll probably re-sign him because he's going to be affordable enough.
And he knows the system. He'll add some depth.
He knows the system. He can play corner and safety, if asked. And and they know him. I think they'll bring him back. They'll bring back Dan Skipper probably just because they like him he's a great locker room guy. He's an offensive lineman they can stick in almost anywhere on the line if they need to.
That's some good versatility.
Yeah, and they just like his attitude. They like his story. Dan Campbell seems to love the guy.
Yeah, I like Bobby Wagner. Would it be nice to get somebody younger like Levante David? Maybe, but he's going to cost a lot more money, and that's going to totally go against a compensatory thing like you're talking about. I just want to see them sign somebody as a free agent that they think can come in and kind of solidify things, even if it's a short-term thing while we build up around that person. I think that would have a huge improvement on the defense.
And one other guy who just got cut just a couple days ago who you could maybe see the Lions if they don't find the running back that they want would be maybe a Leonard Fournette. I don't know how he would fit in there, but he could be like your early down guy, and then you could make Swift your third down guy and Jamal Williams your goal line guy.
It'll be interesting to see what the market is for Leonard Fournette because he's an interesting one himself. He's had an interesting career.
Yeah, and I think he's got a different personality too. So fit might be a thing to look into on that.
Yeah, it's rare that a first-round pick gets released that early into their career, just straight up released.
Yeah, that was a weird thing. Especially after he'd been pretty productive for the Jaguars. I don't think he lived up to the hype or the expectations of being picked that high, but he was a productive NFL back.
He was
in a crappy offense,
which is not always easy to do. Right?
No, behind a crappy line.
Well, looking at moving back to the back part of the secondary, there we have Deshaun Elliott, who is a free agent. He played amazingly for us when Tracy Walker went down. I'm hoping we bring him back, but like you said, I think somebody's going to look at him and give him a bigger contract and potentially a bigger role.
I think so too. Somebody's going to offer him 10, 11, 12 million a season, and he's not going to be able to say no to that because the Lions won't offer him that, I don't think.
And you won't blame him if he says yes to that because that's an amazing contract. It'd be great to get him back, but we got him on a 1-year deal.
Yep, and they got a good year of production out of him. The Lions took a chance on him because with Baltimore, he was hurt all the time. Like he was one of those players that would play great when he was on the field, kind of like DeAndre Swift, but he was hurt all the time. So that's the reason why they got him. They took a chance on him and they got him late. So I think you're going to see more guys like that.
But if Deshaun Elliott leaves, we still don't know how Tracy Walker is going to come back. Will he be ready right at the beginning? Will it be a slow process? So it still feels like you need to add something at safety. You can do it free agency or draft, but then defensive back as well. I feel very strongly that the Lions need to sign a free agent defensive back who can be a very strong number 2, if not at least a low-level number 1.
I think so, especially if they don't use like that number 6 pick on a corner. DB is definitely, I think, a position where they're looking to upgrade not only maybe necessarily the starters, but the depth along the line as well. I was hoping to see a little more from Chase Lucas last year. Maybe he progresses more in his second year. He looked good in camp. And he looked good in preseason games. Come regular season, he just wasn't on the field hardly at all. So it'll be interesting to see if he progresses at all. Mike Hughes is a free agent at corner.
Yeah, I think the secondary is going to be telling. If we can solidify that a little bit better and the linebacking core, bringing a free agent in is going to be a big move for those. I think that also will show us what they might do with the draft because, like you said, if they don't sign a free agent defensive back, that's telling that they're taking a defensive back in the first round. My hope is that they sign a defensive back and they draft one. Maybe we get Joey Porter Jr. at 18 or something like that.
Yeah, I could totally see them doing that, and I'm kind of a big believer in that kind of thing of like double tapping a position. You don't just draft a guy and say, okay, well, there's our guy. You got to have a plan B for in case that rookie doesn't pan out. Not ready, gets hurt. You constantly got to have plan Bs and be bringing in at least replacement level players.
Yeah, Brad Holmes has talked about that, how they're and I think Dan Campbell did, how they're willing to bring in more than one person for a spot, which means they could re-sign Jamal Williams and draft a running back in the second or third round because Swift is gone or he's got to improve because his contract's up next year. If he's going to re-sign, he's got to show durability. So you don't want to just do one. You might do both there. So the defensive back would be an amazing position to do that in.
Yeah, and we've seen the last few years, too, where the Lions they've had a pretty good history of picking up some guys, undrafted free agents who can come in and fill some holes for them. And just picking, another guy at corner, I guess, that we haven't even talked about is Melifonwu. He's a king. He's a guy who, if he steps up, I think he could be a difference maker in that secondary. He's had the possibility of playing safety as well.
Was he a third-round pick?
Yeah.
He was one
like
of the
2 years ago.
The pick we got for the Stafford trade, I believe, that third-round pick.
I think it might have been, that extra third, the 2 firsts and a third.
So it'd be nice that, there's still some potential with him. We haven't seen everything, and that would be nice. Well, before we totally wrap things up, I guess we still do have to talk about one more position, and that would be the kicker position. I know we don't often talk about kickers and special teams, but the Lions have had some interesting kicking situations in the last 2 years since Matt Prater left us. Michael Badgley came in and he kind of solidified things. I think he is technically a free agent. Personally, I am hoping that the Lions bring him back and they bring in a rookie, whether they draft somebody in the 6th or 7th round or they bring in an undrafted free agent. I think it would be bring him back, bring in a rookie, have them compete in camp.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, one of the few mistakes they really made last year from a personnel decision was letting Riley Patterson go. And then their kicker position was just a mess after that.
So I read a lot of reviews about Patterson and Seibert, talking about the training camp battle. I couldn't agree with anything I was reading. I kept going back to the year before, and it's like Seibert kept getting hurt. He kept getting hurt. And Patterson, when he filled in for him, he filled in admirably. He filled in solidly. Was he better in camp? Maybe not. I don't know. I didn't watch their stats that closely. But you know what he did do? He did go to the playoffs with Jacksonville as their kicker.
And very good last year. I mean, he was one of the better kickers, I think, top half of the league at least, as far as kickers last season. I mean, he was a solid kicker. So I think that was one of the few mistakes that Holmes has made here, aside from maybe trading for Trinity Benenson.
Yeah, that one's still there.
That one didn't work, but I mean, that was a 7th round pick.
And it was a desperation move because we had 2 starting receivers who weren't about to even be on our roster after week 1.
Yeah.
But the Riley Patterson thing, it perplexed me at the time it was happening, and in the back of my mind, I'm like, my gut feeling's like, I hope this doesn't backfire because Patterson was decent for us the year before, and then we let him go because we kept the guy who kept getting hurt. And he was getting hurt not tackling somebody on the field, but other, I don't want to call them odd injuries, but unique injuries, not in the middle of tackling somebody on a punt return or a kick return or something.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, James, anything else you wanted to touch on before we wrap things up here?
I don't know. I mean, I think we've hit on a lot of it. I mean, I think the Michael Brockers release was pretty much a given. So I don't think that really surprised anybody.
I don't think so. When you're healthy and inactive for that many games and you can save the team that much in a salary cap spot, that was a pretty foregone conclusion. I think you're right on that one.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see how some of the new coaches work out too. I mean, the Lions got poached 3 or 4 coaches. So, I mean, they were able to keep Ben Johnson and everybody's celebrating about that. But, they lost their defensive line coach.
Washburn left. Staley left.
Ben Johnson could have had any number of jobs, I think, this year. And they're just assuming that in a year or 2 he's gone.
Yeah, if the Lions win a playoff game next year or their offense does as well as it did this year, there's a chance.
Mm-hmm. Or maybe, I don't know. It could be weird. It could be maybe Ben Johnson, in interviewing for these these head coaching jobs, just realized maybe I'm not a head coach. Maybe offensive coordinator is where I need to stay. That would be great. That would be the best case scenario for the Lions.
That would be amazing. I heard him recently say that after he did some interviews, he and his wife talked about things, and he kind of liked what they were building in Detroit. And he said some people are trying to get to the head coaching job as quickly as possible. He's already had a pretty quick rise. And I think he was looking around and looking at the foundation they were building and was like, kind of wanted to see it through a little bit. So that little bit might just be 1 more year and then we don't have him. Or it might be 2 or 3 more years. But we know that if we see sustained success, he will not be here long.
Probably not long term. If they have, it could have just been him also just being like, I don't think I'm ready to be head coach quite yet. I think I want to do a few more things as an offensive coordinator and learn some more things.
And then you're that much more equipped to be the head coach when you move into that position.
Mm-hmm. The interesting thing that I've always kind of looked at in the NFL is that there's no salary cap for coaches. So why not just go out and hire there's no limit on how many you can have either. I mean, I don't think there's anything in the rules that says that there's a certain set number of coaches that you can have. So the Lions are adding coaches all over.
They're saying they might add Michael Brockers to the coaching staff. Like, fans are speculating.
I've heard fans speculating about that. Yeah. Which, I mean,
why not?
Yeah, why not? He knows what he's doing. And we've got a new defensive line coach right now, so we might need a good assistant to go with him. That's the thing that's always struck me is, like, there's no salary cap for coaches. Just go out and spend. It's the way to get around the salary cap. Get the best coaches you want, spend a boatload of money.
At some point, will they build into players' contracts that when you retire, we guarantee to hire you at this job at this certain amount of money, which I think probably can't be done. But that'd be funny.
Yeah, that would be interesting. Or the player coach. Or somebody
like baseball player coaches.
Yeah, somebody like we. But I mean, I don't think they would want to do that for somebody in the NFL, where I just don't think it was working as well in the
probably
NFL.
not.
But it would be interesting to have somebody just retire. You say, okay, why don't you just retire and we'll hire you as a coach, we'll pay you the same thing.
And it might happen with Michael Brockers. We'll see what happens. James, thanks so much for being on. I love talking Lions stuff with you and love your insight. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks a lot.
Folks, in these next few days and weeks are going to be very interesting with the free agency moves. We will be keeping an eye on those, and we will be back to talk to you more about that when those start taking place. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please subscribe to Not the Same Old Lions podcast to get alerts about new episodes. Also, follow me on Twitter @Matt Soltesiak. And until next time, stay gritty, my friends.